Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jason Buffington from Veeam Software. We're in for another installment of Industry Insights. However, this week we have a radical upgrade to the show because joining us instead of Dave Russell is my dear friend, one of my favorite Veemers, and actually also a former Microsoft alumni like myself, Leah Trushanecki. Leah, welcome to the show this week. Thank you for standing in for Dave. I know cloud is something that is important to you. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and then let's get into the topic of the day.
Sounds great. Well, I'm certainly not an upgrade from Dave, but I am at least a different flavor. So there you go. Again, my name's Leah Trushanecki. I'm a principal product marketing manager here at Veeam, ex-Microsoft alumni, and I specialize in our public cloud solutions. I specifically look after our Azure solution set, but I also work super closely with the AWS and Google Cloud teams. I also formerly covered the service provider business. So shout out to any VCSP partners who are out here on LinkedIn Live today. And I work super closely with folks like Jason and Dave so that we can sort of spread the word of cloud, because just like other rapidly evolving forms of technology, it is really difficult to kind of pin down what is currently going on in this specific space. So having forums like this where we can get the latest and greatest information out as soon as possible is really exciting. I think this is my third or fourth time on the show, so I'm super excited to be here.
Well, welcome back, and you are hailing from that little state of Ohio up north. I hail from the great state of Texas down below.
Sorry, I missed that. Did you call my state little? Can I get an OH? For any football fans out there, the Ohio State University Buckeyes in the United States are #1 in the nation in the polls. So where is Texas on that list? Because I don't think they're making the playoffs this year, are they?
I forget. Now that you know exactly where we're from and what we're passionate about, let's go ahead and find out where everyone else is from as well. So please, on your favorite social media platform, as you are listening for today, our goal is always to turn the entire globe green. So far, we can do that. If you look in the United States, there's that little state up in Ohio on the northern edge. We've got social media, as well as me coming out of the great state of Texas. Productions also coming out of Georgia. The goal is to turn the rest of the country, the rest of the world green. So please let us know where you're from. And if you disagree with the Ohio State being #1 in the polls, feel free to weigh in on that as well. In the meantime, though, let's go ahead and take a look at something that we can agree on, as well as what 1,200 organizations also agreed on. One of the things we're going to do today is talk about some of the research and then apply that specifically to Leah's areas of expertise in hybrid and cloud domains. So this is a slide that Dave and I actually covered last week. This comes from the Ransomware Trends Report for 2023. That report surveyed 1,200 non-Veeam customers, blind organizations, all of whom suffered at least one successful ransomware attack in calendar 2022. And because it's a blind survey, it lets them be a lot more honest as far as how bad was it. It also allowed us to do some myth busting. So this particular slide actually busts two myths that I think set the stage for us today. The one on the right actually looks at how much data was affected during the most impactful cyber attack of the last year. Now, what you actually don't see on this particular chart is there are two columns that color-wise looked nearly identical. That looked at the amount of data that was affected in the data center and the amount of data that was affected in remote or branch office. In this case, we're only looking at the cloud data because the data was the same. It was within 1 or 2 percentage points at each step along the way. And I think that's important because I think a lot of folks believe that, well, the remote offices, branch offices, they are more vulnerable because they live on that edge. Well, not necessarily true. Maybe the cloud is more vulnerable because it's outside of our brick and mortar. And it turns out that's not true either. And the takeaway that Dave and I finished last week's episode on was, if you have architected a hybrid cloud strategy correctly, then you have made it transparently seamless for your users to navigate between their local servers, their data center servers, and their cloud hosted workloads. It should be seamless for the users to connect across those topologies. And if it's seamless for the user, it's seamless for the bad actor. So that was kind of the takeaway for that. And then to make that point go home, on the left-hand side, we also looked at what kinds of platforms were targeted during the event. And in this case, yeah, Windows stuff is almost always top of mind because silly users keep clicking on stuff. I actually just clicked on a phishing test earlier today that our cyber team had sent out. I did recognize it as phishing, by the way. So yeah, user devices are top of mind. Windows servers, when you have the broadest install base, you have the biggest attack surface. And then cloud comes in pretty much tie for number 3. And then there's the waterfall that comes underneath that. Leah, this is a space that you live in. Let's talk about those myths. And you come from preaching from that ivory tower on the Microsoft side of things. Is this how they see that? Is this how you see that? Talk about what you see here.
Yeah, we're really fortunate that we have obviously an amazing partnership with Microsoft. We're also building some really amazing partnerships with other first-party security software companies. And overwhelmingly, they are all seeing the same kind of notes within their own research, which is the cloud gets affected just as much as the other kinds of workloads, right? And part of that could be the fact that a lot of workloads that are migrating to the cloud are oftentimes those tier 1 workloads, those workloads that need the high availability, that HA architecture. And so, of course, that's what the bad actors want to go after. They want to go after where it's going to hurt the most. So there's a number of reasons that you see it this high on the list. But I think what is myth busting about this is the fact that people think high availability equals availability of data. And that is simply not the case, right? When you look at something like the shared responsibility model, which the Veeam team talks about every day, everybody can kind of take a shot for the number of times that we say it, because it's certainly something that we spend a lot of time talking about, as does Microsoft, AWS, and other cloud providers. They note that ultimately protection of data is your responsibility as the end user of the cloud infrastructure. And of course, so much of the attack vectors come in at those access points, just like Jason was talking about. One of the things that we have talked about recently is some kind of recent high-profile cybersecurity attacks. I know there's a big one going on right now in the mortgage industry. I don't know if anybody has a mortgage in the United States, but it seems like about 1/3 of mortgages can't be paid right now, mysteriously. We'll have to wait to see what the forensic analysis is on that, to see what kind of attack happened. But if we roll it back just a few months, you can look at something like the MGM attack, where a bad actor was able to use social engineering to get into the environment, and they creeped and crawled their way as far as they thought they could in the access, and then they struck when it would hurt the most. So that's kind of the reality that we're living in, is that ultimately they can come in from anywhere, and really no one is safe. The call is coming from inside the house, and you just have to assume breach. That even comes from Microsoft's own language. You have to assume breach. So then it becomes us as data protection professionals to figure out what the next steps are.
So much good stuff in that. And this is why we keep inviting you back. The average gestation rate that we often hear about once the bad actor is in, before you discover them or they make themselves known, is 200 days. Right, more than half of a year they have been lurking around within that environment along the way. So super scary from that perspective. I will confess that when COVID first happened and we were all stopped traveling, one of the things that our CTO challenged each of the members of the strategy team is go learn a new skill. And I've been a server person for over 3 decades. So it's like, okay, I understand server architecture. I'm going to go learn cloud-hosted infrastructure. And I chose the other cloud, not the Azure one that we all like, because I wanted to learn skills, right? And so I stood it up and everything was working in the thing, and then I couldn't connect to it. And I reduced the security and I couldn't connect to it. And I reduced the security and I couldn't connect to it. And then afterwards, I had somebody else checking my work. And what I had actually done was I now could connect. and so could everyone else because I completely disabled all the firewalls and controls. So one of the things I think is a challenge when we look at where that exposure comes from is where I have 30 years as a storage and server person, I have near zero expertise in networking. And unfortunately, those kinds of those skills are now conflated. We talk about cloud hosting, and that can also actually increase the attack surface in some atypical ways. Yeah, so breadth can be a problem. And speaking of breadth, let's go ahead and see where folks are joining us from today as we kind of look through. So if we look on the map, all right, we got some green going on. Loving this. Let's take a look in the U.S. first to start off with. It looks like Pennsylvania's in the house. Illinois is in the house. Hopefully that's not just my uncle who's chiming in from Chicago. If it is, hi, Ted. Let's see, we got Louisiana in. Always good for some food this time of year. So let's see if we go down. Okay, I don't recognize that wedge, but I have been advised that's Latvia. And if so, that's the first time in like 3.5 years that I've been doing this live stream that I think Latvia has shown up, which I just think is insanely cool. So a personal and heartfelt welcome and thank you for joining us to my new favorite Latvian. If I haven't said that right, then please shout out for that. God love when Brazil's in the house, big old chunk of the planet just turns green. And that is metaphorical to their forest region as well. So yay for Brazil coming in. So thank you for that. Welcome. And I think Panama on that very top edge. The civilized world would not be the same without you. And then also we got Mozambique, we got Senegal, Kenya, and of course my dear friends down in South Africa, and also my colleagues out in India as well. So welcome to everybody who's joining in, and please continue to pile on. Tell us where you're from. I'm going to start business traveling again in 2024. So chime in on why I should come visit your neck of the woods along the way. Oh, and I just got pinged. Latvia, one of your neighbors, Estonia, evidently is feeling competitive today. They want to make sure they weighed in as well. So we will light the two of you up and then see what happens afterwards. All right, so we're talking about breadth of clouds, right? And then how that changes the attack surface along the way. Leah, one of the things that you mentioned in passing was that for a lot of organizations, there can be a confusion between the durability of cloud services and that need to protect. And I think the other confusing thing that a lot of folks would assume is, doesn't every one of these clouds have their own little point product or utility that'll do that? Now, first of all, if you are just in the data center, remember those days when we all just had raised floor? No one in the data center only uses snapshotting for NetApp, only uses RMAN for Oracle, only uses ODBC for SQL, and only uses NT Backup for Windows Server. No one uses that collection or hodgepodge of tools. And yet there are folks out there that are using the little bit of utilities for each and every cloud and then wondering why they don't have time to manage them. Surely there might be a better way.
There might indeed be. And I think part of that is you mentioned your own kind of skilling journey. Yep. The folks who spend all of their time in the cloud have their own skilling journey, which is backup is different. And if you're on this live stream, I would venture to guess that you probably are one of our backup experts in the community. And it's really time for us to sort of spread those skills out to other IT communities like the cloud folks, because whenever we talk with organizations, we find that they are doing just snapshotting, or maybe they're using a free point tool. Sure. And the reality is it's just creating this like patchwork of multiple backup solutions. And you simply will not have the confidence that you can recover in the face of a cybersecurity attack that could be affecting multiple vectors, right? So there's some real value in consolidating, but especially consolidating under best practices. And as backup folks, we have decades of experience building best practices, but the cloud is a relatively new technology, right? So this is where it's really important that the backup community kind of comes in and starts to talk more about what those best practices are, because I find that so often when I am talking with cloud folks at different organizations that we're speaking with, I'm back to basics. Yeah. I'm talking about the difference between snapshots and backups. I'm talking about things like separating your environments so that you have that sort of protection between, oh, this goes down, this is still available. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But Jason, I think, this slide, it's very pretty, of course. It really illustrates a nice point, which is that whether you are using software as a service, for example, we have an extensive user community of Microsoft 365 backup users.
Sure.
We just introduced Salesforce recently as well. That's architected very similarly. Of course, we have solutions that are native to AWS, EC2, RDS, et cetera, Azure, Google Cloud, and of course, what Veeam is known for, which is virtualization and even Edge. Being able to pull everything together just makes life easier, especially for the cloud folks, because quite frankly, the cloud is so instantaneous that they just like easy button solutions. I think sort of data center folks can be gluttons for punishment. We sometimes like to just do our own things our own way. Cloud folks don't do that. They really just want to be able to click that easy button in the marketplace. But knowing that someone who is a backup expert just has their back, I find that there's more teaming now than there ever has been before between cloud teams, central IT teams, even security teams are getting in on the mix, especially as we've talked about with the previous data set. This is proliferating everywhere. It's attacking everywhere. And we now need to work together as a team because each of us has a different piece to the puzzle and it can all come together in one place.
Love that. One of the things that that Dave and I have talked about when we look at all the personas that can be involved in these kinds of projects is never in the history of ever has a workload owner like a cloud admin or a database admin or a 365 admin said, when I grow up, I want to be a backup guy or gal, right? Never has that ever happened. So, but what we often see is that when a new platform first comes out, that new workload owner says, no one gets this like I get this. And oh, by the way, I'm on the hook to make sure it's always available. So I'm going to do the backup and I'm going to use a point product or something that's purpose built for that. But then as that maturation journey goes on, they realize, I don't want to do the backups. I want to do the restores. Right? When the business says I got to restore data, I'm the best person as the workload owner to do the restore. But I don't want to do the tax of the backup that happens over time. And so what you'll often see is there is a shift where initially when the platform is in incubation, it's a purpose-built single point tool. And then over time that evolves to where eventually the data protection team or the core IT team not only takes over backup, but also starts using a more unified tool. So it simply becomes yet another workload to be protected. And we're certainly seeing that shift over the last couple of years. The percentage of folks who first thought 365 protected itself, then they realized that was wrong. And then they were protecting it with a point tool on its own, but it was run by the 365 admin. And now the majority, vast majority, are either being, the backups are being managed by either the core backup team or via managed backup as a service. Either way, the 365 admin still is the one invoking the restore, but they don't have to deal with the tax that goes into that. And I think we're probably earlier in that maturity cycle for the SharePoint admin, for the cloud hosting admin. But I love the fact that we're going to see that maturation over time. Also, Leah, let's bust another myth. And that is that once you take a workload and put it in a cloud, that's the only cloud it'll ever be in. It'll never come back. It'll never move anywhere else. Can I get an amen on how flawed that is?
No, absolutely. And in fact, what's kind of interesting about this concept of portability, being able to migrate a workload from on-premises into the cloud is, well, then you've done it. You realize that you could move it again if you need to. And that sounds like a sort of gimmick there, but we're actually seeing this really happen with organizations that we talk to. And part of, probably one of my favorite reasons for it is they're finding that if they play the cloud providers against each other, they can oftentimes get better pricing. So being able to move backup or move production workloads and using backup to do that is an absolutely very valid use case, which once again means if you're just using a point product that only works for that individual native solution, it's simply not going to get it done.
So, and here's a couple other examples that I see all the time. So I certainly see cases where the developers in an organization have stood it up in Cloud A It was free. It's what they learned in university, whatever it happens to be. But when they decide to roll that application into production, the CFO or the COO, not the CIO, says, we're a massive 365 shop. So we have a bunch of Azure credits. So if it'll run in Azure, we're going to move it over to Azure, right? So, and that creates an interesting quandary because almost every hyperscale cloud will help you move from on-prem to their cloud, right? But that's a one-way Hotel California kind of deal where you can put it into the cloud, but you can't get it back again. You certainly are not going to find tools to move it from one cloud to another unless you happen to be using a third party that happens to understand all the clouds equally. If only there was such a tool out there that could do that. Hey, we've got a couple comments in the thing. Let's talk about a couple of these to chime in, and then maybe we'll get a chance to even see the map again after this. So Seema's got a question on for Salesforce backup. What is the mechanism used to commit these backups? Is this access via the Salesforce API? And how is immutability applied? Redundancy? Thanks to the. Oh my. Okay, so what Seema just introduced is the suggestion for a topic for a whole nother 20-minute live stream. It is API centric, is the short answer. Immutability is always applied to the repository, not to the backup stream itself. So it's how that drops behind the scenes. One of the things that you're going to see in the platform view that you're, if we bring the platform back up, is you're going to see more and more where the method of the control plane and the method of the repository get more and more separated, which gives us some flexibility because then as we make innovations to the storage layer, things like where can you put immutable storage, right? Can that be on-prem immutable? Can that be cloud immutable? Can that be tape air gap? For each of those, as the VBR flagship continues to drive what our innovation strategy is, the where data can be immutable and where that control plane can live will continue to evolve over time. Case in point, also, that's also how you see something like Cirrus, which is our backup service. It wraps around the existing Veeam technologies and provides extended control plane functionality. So there's some great questions in there, but ones that I can't do and still cover the rest of the slides from today. So, but you know what? If you send me a direct link or if we capture your information, we have a friend, AZ, who lives and breathes for what I call short question, long answer. And he's a rock star. So let's get Seema and AZ connected. Lien, visited Veeam software stand at Gitix in Dubai. It was nice to meet your team. Thank you so much. I am huge fans of our Dubai Veeam team. So many really, really kind humans who absolutely happen to be very, very smart along the way. So,
and I did hear, by the way, about that event. I was just talking with my cloud team who did send a few folks to that Dubai event, and they said it was absolutely jam-packed, both at the Veeam booth, and we also had some folks at AWS's booth to do some, kind of co-solutions together. They said it was an incredible event. So glad you had a great time.
Awesome. Leanne also asks questions around how does artificial intelligence and machine learning figure into backup. There's some great intelligence that comes in heuristics on. So, for example, in Veeam 1 for the last couple of years, we monitor things like, hey, your average change rate is 2 or 3%, and then one day you have a 40% change rate, right? That's more machine learning than artificial intelligence. But the idea of using heuristics to look at changes in behaviors, we've got partnering technologies where you can actually assess the data that's in some of the data protection solutions and use that for classification. And on-prem, I like to use virtualization tags in VMware vCenter so that once I figure out that certain VMs have a certain kind of data in them, put a tag on it that says this has PII. This is susceptible to GDPR, whatever that is. And then the next night, the backup policy changes because we know we have different kind of handling requirements based on the kinds of data that's in it. And that was deterministic based on how it was scanned. Oh, by the way, things like telemetry for how we're using the product. And then where you have a whole session, Leah, on using cost as a model to then decide where should a workload go. And oh, by the way, how to protect it effectively. All of those fit into that dynamic over time. It is 11:24, so could we light the map up really quick? And then I want to cover one more slide after this, especially because if we're going to turn the world green, having Canadians weigh in is a beautiful way to do that. So welcome to my neighbors to the north. You got to love it when the U.S. is literally surrounded by things that are green, so thank you for that. Also in the U.S., we've got Colorado weighing in. We got Arizona weighing in. My neighbors to the south in Mexico are also piling on this morning. So it's still morning, so buenos dias to y'all. We got Romania in the house. We got Germany weighing in. Let's see, let's take a look down south. Ivory Coast. It's been a while since we've seen them. That's awesome. And then over to the east, we have Pakistan and I think that's UAE. Admittedly, the Texas education system is not the greatest when it comes to world geography, so I'm punting on that one. But thank you all for piling on along the way. All right, so let's see if we can solve this problem a bit. We talked about heuristics. We've talked about the breadth of platform. The idea, by the way, of moving data from one workload to another and not having to sacrifice the quality of protection that happens with that. The other thing we should probably weigh in on, though, is the idea of security and layering along that way. You got 3 minutes, Leah. Help us land the plane on this one.
Yeah. So, one of the things that becomes kind of a best practice and easy thing for us to talk about in backup land is this idea of separation. We all know that you, on a data center kind of environment, would back up your production data that's sitting on various servers, and you have dedicated backup servers. And of course, we've all talked about the 32110 rule, so you probably should have a copy of that data offsite somewhere. That all is inherent separation of data. But when you're talking about cloud technology, you have sort of an ephemeral definition of what your infrastructure is because you don't have access to the underlying infrastructure. It's all infrastructure as a service. And so you have to introduce separation into these environments in order to make them more sustainable.
Right.
So doing things that are logical separation, for example, you have your production Azure environment, for example. You might create a dedicated backup account just for your Azure backups. That keeps things separate, right? You might want to put it in a different availability zone, for example. So just introducing some of these concepts that we are so familiar with in the data center can actually make a huge difference with cloud infrastructures. But then a lot of this other stuff is things that we talk about for on-prem data. So things like executing least privilege access controls by using RBAC built into Veeam solutions, integrating in with your identity and access management solutions. And of course, we continue to expand the IAM tools that we integrate with, including Azure AD, AWS's solutions. And then, of course, introducing immutability and encryption into the equation. Both AWS and Azure have immutable storage options as a part of their infrastructures. But again, if you are just taking snapshots of your cloud data, you can't necessarily turn on immutable storage for that, right? Because it lives in the production environment. It doesn't have immutable storage as an option. So being able to create that backup, move it into an object storage environment, turning on immutable storage, these basics can make a huge, huge difference in their cloud environments, which is why someone like Robbie Hudak, who is the CISO for Ciox Health, chose Veeam in order to back up all of their environments. They actually are a healthcare system that has acquired several other healthcare environments over the years. And so she has a very, very hodgepodge, heterogeneous set of environments. I've had lunch with her. I've learned a lot about her environment. I obviously won't share it here because security, but needless to say, a point product wouldn't come close because it would just be an absolute quilt of different solutions patched together. And as a CISO who needs the confidence that you can recover, that simply wouldn't get it done. And oh, by the way, it's incredibly expensive. We were actually able to save Ciox Health, something like $20,000 a month on their backup environments because of just simple basics like compression and tiering to lower cost storage, things that we are used to in the data center, but are kind of newer concepts for the cloud. So these are just some things to think about. And again, I spoke about them in a sort of cavalier manner because I think this audience knows all too well that these are pretty basic, but again, they're not being done in the cloud. And if half of your organization's workload is in the cloud, well, then you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And just some simple steps could be a great way to stay more resilient.
That's probably a great way to finish. Let's offer something that um, along considering all the point products, it takes a village, right? Of all the folks that need to be involved to do this. One of the reasons why Veeam produces or publishes or republishes so much independent research is to helpfully help you give fresh conversations, right? To invite the cloud folks and the cyber folks and the CISO and the IT ops and the 360, all the folks, get them at the same table. And sometimes it takes a fresh conversation to do that. That's what this research was actually for, is looking at 7,000 different IT and security professionals, from IaaS admins to 365 admins to CISO and SecOps. A couple backup admins are in there as well. The idea being, let's make sure we all agree on what the problem is, so that we can ensure that our solution holistically, or our organization is holistically protected along the way. Leah, it is bottom of the hour. So first and foremost, I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, and I love that you get a chance to share some with the kids at home. Next week, this time, neither Leah nor I will be back. Instead, Dave Russell will get to talk about the upgrade that people get when I'm not on the call. And instead, he is upgrading with Michael Cade. They're going to be talking about Kasten and containers and all the things that happen when you go into a serverless world. And oh, by the way, I'm guessing they're going to talk about a lot of these same pedigrees that many operations folks are not following in yet another cloud-based architecture along the way. We do have a couple other comments that have come in as far as alerts and attacks go, and we will try to pile on to those afterwards. Other than that, thank you for watching. Get some team members involved. Let's bring that QR code up one more time. Get your phones ready. Snap that one more time. Watching. Have a great day.